Mr. Girl and abuse. Oh yeah, I need to do my TLDR of it first. So let's go through the purpose of this. The purpose, as stated by Mr. Girl, is if you have a similar problem or even an analogous problem, I'm hoping this video can help me. You. And he makes that little correction there. It does feel like a lot of the video is almost like a letter to his past self and not necessarily a letter to broader people. And in that way, I think he kind of hurts his own goal here. If you're trying to reach other abusers, maybe making the message a little bit more broad or focusing more on your steps and stuff like that rather than your own story could be more helpful to those people, but it feels more raw to focus on your story, so I can get going either way. This video is made for abusers and or people who need to understand abusers. I think it can certainly reach abusers given the humanizing attempts, but may fall on its face in convincing people who have the current beliefs that he mocks, right? Because he makes fun of people in this. While someone like Contra walks the line well between poking fun at her target audience while broadening their horizons, I think Mr. Girl only makes fun of those beliefs here, hoping they stick along to hear him out on the other points, which is a tough ask of people in my opinion. Let's go to my general thoughts. Oh, I'll save those. We'll cover those at the end. Instead, we should look at the video.
I was in my early 20s the first time I hit a woman. We got in a fight and she slapped me. And I think it was the first time a girlfriend of mine had ever slapped me. I grabbed her wrist and I forced her to keep slapping me harder and harder till basically I was bashing her wrist bone against my forehead. She screamed for me to stop, and I did, and I was pretty horrified by what I'd done because I never thought I would be the type of person to hit a woman, or type of man, I guess. And I used to be like you. I used to fantasize about beating up men who beat up women. I used to fantasize about killing child molesters and pedophiles. And then, after that first time, a few weeks later, I grabbed her arms because she wasn't listening to me or something. And I grabbed them really hard, and afterwards she showed me bruises on her arms. She was like, "Oh, it's okay, I bruise easy." She didn't talk like that, but that's how she made me feel like she was talking. It scared me. She said, "Okay, it's okay, I bruise easy, you know, don't worry, it's fine." And then a little bit after that, she had just destroyed the overhead light fixture in the kitchen with a Swiffer and was smashing it into the ground as hard as she could, screaming stop at me because she didn't like something I was saying. And after she finished, I just said, "Okay, that was so loud that the neighbors are going to call the cops, and before they get here, I need you to put on a long sleeve shirt so they don't see the bruises on your arms, because if they do, I'm going to spend the night in jail, 100%. And she was like, "Oh, really?" And I was like, "Really?" And it was at that moment that I heard myself say that I thought I might have a problem. Now, I've never hit Shaylin. There's been some speculation about that, and I'm happy to say I've never hit Shaylin. And that's how I know that I'm cured. Because if I were capable of hitting Shaylin, I would have done it by now. Because I have wanted to hit Shaylin so incredibly badly and so incredibly hard. And the fact that I haven't is proof that I'm a changed man. Now, if you have a similar problem or even an analogous problem, I'm hoping this video can help me. You. Well, I'm hoping it'll help both of us.
We have the purpose. We have the common cringe statements from Mr. Girl, like that he's really, really wanted to hit Shaylin, which I think is like an upsetting statement for people to hear, or the very opening of the video that cuts from this music to immediately, you know, this story. I often talk about Mr. Girl as like a stand-up comedian, but instead of making you laugh, he makes you really uncomfortable. So he builds up moments through statements and other forms of language to make you really uncomfortable. And then that's kind of like what the punchline is meant to be. Steven's pointed this out. We've used a quote from him kind of before about that.
By the time you drill down all the way to that, it's going to be a pretty agreeable statement. But they always come out initially as like incredibly disagreeable or very hyperbolic to the point of absurdity.
Another thing that I want to note is when the girlfriend is smashing the light fixture, it's really quick. And I didn't notice it the first time I watched this, but later on, he's going to have the message that there are often reasons why somebody is being abusive, reasons why people get physical. And when you are physical and when you hit them or get in a fight, then you don't have to focus on what the reasons were. You can focus on the fight and the evil person that did the fighting or did the hitting. And you kind of morph the problem into something that's simpler to deal with. And then you know, passionately embrace the other person because now both of you are fighting against a common foe, and it obfuscates the entire complex reason that the abuse had occurred in the first place. He notes that there was something that he had said that pushed her to the point of smashing the overhead light fixture and then smashing the fuck out of it on the ground. But we don't know what that was at all. And at this point in the video, we don't have the thesis, so we have no way of reasonably interpreting what the girlfriend had did. And so I just want to point that out, because if you watch this twice, you may pick up on that, but you may not really. Because while he talks about other people who have abused him, he doesn't, I feel like, go into as much detail about the reasons for them as he does the reasons for why he abuses other people. And I don't know, just a little note. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't think it is, but it's something that I picked up on that's a very, very little thing to notice there.
Anyway, I've broken it down into a few steps. So step one is, why do you do it? So everybody kind of assumes, I guess in pop culture, that men are violent towards women because they're angry. And anger could definitely be a part of it, but I think that that's a little reductive. So for me, one thing I noticed I was feeling a lot in those moments was panic, fear of being abandoned or being ignored, or fear of being thrust into having to face a lot of things I was avoiding or feelings I didn't want to be feeling. And that fear put me in like a fight or flight thing where I felt like I had to lash out just to get out of the situation and make it stop. And one thing people don't talk about a lot is that a violent outburst like that can be a unifying event for a couple. So unless you're doing like any bodily harm to the other person or serious property damage, like one time I broke my ex's laptop, and that there definitely was not like the kind of holding each other and crying and making up thing after that. But a lot of times there is. And you get to sort of join forces against the you that just snapped. And you're like, whoa, that was crazy. Wow, I really went insane there. Wow, we're on a team against that evil part of me. I'm so glad that he's gone. And it can just be this kind of cycle of denial, and then you get to apologize, and apologizing is fun, and it's very simple. It takes a complex problem like some dynamic where you're not hearing each other or understanding each other, or some big unspoken thing you're not talking about, and makes it very, very simple. I hit you, it hurt you, I feel bad, oops. And it just makes it all very ironically kind of easy to deal with and then push under the rug.
But one little thing here is, and I worry that this is part of the message that he gets across, and I hope it's not intentional. This doesn't mean that focusing on the abuse at all is not worthwhile. So what I mean to say is, like, it can simplify things, it pushes things under the rug. However, it creates a new problem that does have to be dealt with. It isn't a problem to apologize and work towards change. It isn't a problem to unite as a couple against that issue. It isn't a problem to seek therapy or to seriously consider the other forms of abuse that happen as well. So, like, one thing that I kind of see in the way that he acts with people and the way that he's acted on stream or with Shaylin is I worry that like there are other forms of abuse in the way that you talk with people, the way that you demand things of people, the way that you interact with your spouse that isn't necessarily physical, but is still worthwhile to talk about or to try and fix. Like I remember there was another video where he mentions that he tried to go to therapy, to couples therapy, and the therapist demanded that he not call the other person a liar.
You mentioned therapists, you know, not wanting to work with you. There's specifically, I think you said 5 marriage counselors and family counselors that like refuse to work with you. Can you give us a little info about that?
The best example was the therapist said, you can't ever call each other stupid. Oh, he was like, you can't call her a liar. And I was like, but she's fucking lying. And I said, I don't want a relationship where I can't swear at her and we can't call each other names. And I think he was already looking for a way out because we'd had some real ugly sessions before this, but he was like, well, then I can't help you. That's not what I do. He's like, it's like you're coming into a Ford dealership and asking for a Chevy. And I said, why would you compare your own therapy practice to a mass-produced like car factory? I'm asking you for a custom car. I'm asking you to help me build the thing that I want that's going to make me happy. And he was like, well, he was like, well, then it sounds like you're not happy with the therapy. So I guess this is it.
This is kind of what I'm talking about there is like, you know, abuse in general is something that it's worth focusing on to fix. So I just hope that that's not meant to be the takeaway here, but that's another very, very slight point here.
One of the problems with that is, and I think this is an issue for a lot of people to kind of grasp this or be able to stomach grasping this, when in that moment, when you're apologizing and you're having your makeup sex and she's crying in your arms or you're crying in her arms about what a, you know, abusive piece of shit you are and how you don't deserve her, you are sweeping your own feelings under the rug. You're throwing yourself under the bus because you had a reason. You had a reason to snap, and it's not a justifiable reason to snap, but it's a real reason that you snapped, and those things get tied together.
Another tiny thing. So if you hear people say that he's trying to justify abuse, it's very tiny and it's skipped over there, but listen.
It's not a justifiable reason to snap.
I've seen other people talk about this, and they say that he's trying to justify, like, hitting women or something. That's bad faith. That's not what he's saying. And this one little line can save you if you need to cite something in a conversation with somebody else about this, if you're a Mrgirl fan or something like that, you know, but he doesn't say that. He actually goes against that. I think he knows that it's not justifiable to be beating on women, although maybe there's another clip or a video where he does say that. He doesn't in this video, so I think it's we need to be careful there, and some people aren't that I see talking about this online.
You know, the Twitter thinking about this is like, it's like that men need to be lectured. Like, abusive men need to understand that women are people and need to respect them. And it's like, abusive people they're abusive. They're not stupid. It's not something that you can fix by explaining something to them. You have to take the uncomfortable step of empathizing with what's going on there. And I'll never forget my ex looking at me and calmly saying to me, "Why are you punching me in the face?" It was a good question.
This Zoom, the statement, the pause afterwards could be interpreted in two ways, right? Could be he's doing this to have an emotional impact on you. I think to a lot of people, it does what I've been talking about with the stand-up comedian, but for awkwardness thing. This is a good example of that. He does that quite a bit. I think it takes away from his ability to communicate a message to people. If this is meant to be like a moment where we feel for him, I don't think it lands that way. I don't think doing this stuff helps him, but it's a stylistic choice that Max makes. So I can't offer a lot of advice to Max because the stuff that Max does, just like by the very nature of his style, hurts him. So
I'll add, for the sake of honesty and not for the sake of defending myself, that I punched her very lightly in the face, but I did punch her in the face once, and that was her response.
I want to note this just because other drama correspondents or people in the BIA, they have mentioned to me that it doesn't help him fight against the justification narrative, the narrative that he is using this video as a way to justify, his abuse against other people or abusers more generally when he has statements like that. Because, again, I mentioned he does caveat at several points of the video. He doesn't think it's a justifiable reason. He's not trying to justify there. But it's so easy, and it's the same problem with Steven with his rhetoric, or at least his rhetoric from before. It's so easy to misinterpret you because of the way that you're saying things. So you have to be careful about that. While the line by line can get you off the hook, for me, it doesn't get you off the hook from the public, and the public is not doing a line by line. So like, his statements like that aren't helping him with that narrative here.
Step 2, understand the dynamic. So in my case, hitting women over the next several years from that point on, I think I didn't stop till I was like 30, was a substitute for being listened to. So I didn't feel like I was being empathized with, and everybody plays a part in their relationship dynamics, so I'm not blaming them for that, and I don't know how much they blame me for the things I did, or I don't blame them for the times they hit me. Just shit happens. That's how I see it. I mean, there's extreme circumstances, obviously, but it was a way for me to get them to act like they cared. Now, the problem with doing that, so basically it was like, if you don't care about my feelings, I bet you care about your fucking arm, don't you?
It's another example of what I was talking about.
Invariably, they do care about their arm. The problem is that at that point, they're just placating you. They don't really care. If they didn't care in the first place about what you wanted to talk about or wanted them to pay attention to, they definitely don't care after you hit them. So you're kind of short-circuiting, like circumventing any real possibility for them to empathize with you, which is a really bad idea. It's super effective in the short term, and it seems like it works. And often it's rewarded with like short-term results. The problem is that you're effectively destroying any chance of you being taken care of at the exact moment that you need it the most. Figuring out what's really going on with you is not easy. It's really tempting to focus on the lead up to the outburst 5 minutes before, or whatever you were like superficially talking about at the time. Whatever you're screaming about as you're punching holes in the wall or slapping your girlfriend or shoving her is probably not really what you're upset about. Because if you knew what you were really upset about, you probably would have done something about it before you snapped. So it's going to be in some area that you're not looking in. It's going to be some subtle interaction you're reacting to without realizing it. And it can be really, really, really tough to figure out. At least it was for me. So that is why you need to, step 3, get help. So people tell me to get help all the time. All right, if you look at the comments, well, you can't because my channel is deleted. But if you look at the comments on this video, if there are any comments or tweets or whatever, you can imagine people would tell me to get help all the time. As if it's just like you just flip a switch and then you're helped. It really doesn't work that way.
I want to say something before you hear all of this. This get help thing, this get help step, has perhaps the most problems of this entire video, because he mentions the get help thing, but talks about basically how impossible it is to get help. So it's a bit like weird, because he will talk about how he couldn't get help through therapy or through his family or whatever. And so I would listen there and see how helpful this step would be for the people who would be abusing people.
So when I first came out as an abusive piece of shit woman batterer to my family, I told my father, listen, he's a psychologist, understands family dynamics. So I said, hey, every time we come visit you, we end up getting into some physical altercation at your house after you go to sleep. When we go back to our room, we're basically fist fighting for like an hour every time we come visit you. And I think partly that's happening because you're so demeaning to me and you mock me and you treat me like a fucking loser in front of her. And she doesn't want to see me that way, and I don't want her to see me that way. And I don't stand up to you, and it's humiliating, and it makes me hate her because she's watching it and she's making me aware of it, and I don't want to face it. So I need you to stop doing that. And he said, oh my gosh, oh wow, oh I had no idea, oh my gosh, oh geez. No change. Endless insults, endless ridicule about my job, my body, my life, my relationship, my everything, my outlook on life, the way I talk, the way I think, and then anything I said about it was like, why do we always have to talk about your feelings, Max? Why are you controlling everything? Why can't you? Complete fucking nightmare. So eventually I realized like this relationship is going to fall apart. I basically have to choose. So I left my family. Now the relationship fell apart later anyways, but I had to leave. I had to, because I could see what kind of person it was turning me into. So then we went to couples therapy.
So number one, getting help from the family didn't work. He had to end up just leaving the family. And now we're on to therapy. Let's see how therapy goes in terms of, you remember there's a video about how to help people that are abusing people, and we're meant to give them advice on how to do that. So the family thing didn't work out. Let's see how therapy works out for people who are abusers.
Went to couples therapy, and I think after like 3 weeks, the therapist said, so have you guys been physically violent with each other in the past 6 months? And we both said yes, we've both been violent. And they said, okay, well, we're not going to be able to treat you then. Which of course I was furious, and I was like, this is like a liability thing. Like, you're afraid that one of us is going to kill the other, and then the family of the survivor is going to sue you. And they're like, oh no, it's just that therapy is not as effective. It can actually make things worse. It's like, okay.
And notice he says not as effective, but I don't really think he gave what she said that was more effective, which again is why I'm saying, and to your point, even if this was somebody who felt like they might have abuse in them, therapy might be good for them. That they're not abusing somebody right now, therapy could be a good thing for them. But his portrayal of it here does not necessarily encourage somebody to do that. He doesn't say what the alternative is that they offered, which would be helpful to a viewer listening to this, because at this point it seems like therapy is just a dead end and it's not possible. And the going to your family thing, it didn't work either. And so, well, I'm not going to go to my family. It didn't work out for Mrgirl. It might not work out for me. I probably won't go to therapy because I guess there's this rule about not hitting them in 6 months, and I beat that bitch yesterday. So there's that out the window. So if he would have mentioned the other thing that she would have recommended, it would be very productive for people to have heard, but he doesn't. And Mrgirl seems to have a very complicated relationship with therapy and therapists, because you have his dad, you have this instance of therapy here, you have the instance of couples therapy, which failed for him later with a different partner. So he's not a big fan of therapy, to say the least. And that's a recurring theme that we'll kind of talk about in the final review of this arc with Brittany.
Then, the day that she left me, in probably the worst psychological crisis of my life, I called a bunch of therapists, and one of them on the phone was like, was there any domestic abuse in the relationship? And I said, well, I don't know if it was abuse, but we definitely shoved each other at times. And she was like, I'm not going to be able to help you. So yeah, there's a Los Angeles therapist out there that specializes in anything except domestic violence.
Another point on this that's just occurring to me now. He focuses so much on the ethics and the principles and the constraints that are placed on somebody who is a professional therapist when he's speaking about Dr. K. But I don't hear any kind of thinking about why it is that a therapist or these particular therapists can't help you when you are in an actively abusive relationship here. And that's worrying to me.
My point is, it's not easy to get help. And not only just because people don't want to help you, as I said, it's a complicated problem, because if you're at the point where you're being violent with the person who you supposedly love the most, it probably means that your whole life is fucked up. Shit that you think is unrelated, like your job, your family, your relationship with yourself, just the way you're thinking and interacting with like almost everything. It's all so fucked up that it's come to a head and now you're snapping. And you gotta fix all that shit, and it's pretty daunting. However, if I did it, so can you. Step 4, fuck your guilt. I know you feel guilty. I know you want me to feel guilty. I don't think guilt is that useful, obviously. Largely, I think it's an illusion of control. I just don't think you have as much control over yourself as most people seem to think they do. And least of all when you're snapping. And I think that it takes two to tango. It's not like most people are punching their partner in the face on the first date. It's usually part of a complex dynamic that both people are feeding into. Psychologically, it's too complicated to blame on just one person or assign the fault to just one person. Morally, I guess that's up to you. I think that's complicated too. And then legally, it's your fault, obviously. So you're risking your freedom by being violent, and you have to change. You have to stop, because it's really not good for anybody. I'm going to tell you something that my 80-year-old training client told me at the time when I was getting divorced. Without me mentioning any of this, she said, Max, if you ever got really mad at her, and you ever shook her, or shoved her around, or slapped her around a little bit, don't you ever feel bad about that. 'Cause that's hot. That's passion, baby. That's sexy. And it was really nice to hear.
Now, it may have been nice to hear, but this doesn't talk about the reasons that somebody does it. It maybe touches on the passionate sex or romantic, period that happens afterwards when you both are looking at the evil and fighting it together. But I have a lot of problems with this. We'll get into it at the end. I'll let the video continue playing, and then we'll just round up through it.
When you're abusive, you're an abuser. You're a piece of shit. You're subhuman trash who deserves to lose your job and your family. And I was gonna say when I was writing this, your YouTube channel, but that was a few days ago. And I guess I'll just say it still, because your Vimeo channel doesn't have the same I'll fucking probably lose that too by the time this goes up. But anyway, now that we're free to say anything, I will also add that one thing that confounds all of this is that I have definitely noticed some arousal in women after being violent towards them. And that's confusing when the person that you're hitting is naked with their legs spread 20 minutes later. It definitely reinforces the dynamic and then ties it to sex in like a really weird way. It makes it pretty hard to break the cycle. But that's what you have to do. I mean, no matter what happens, even if you feel like your partner is encouraging it, you got to break the cycle. That's all it is. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Here are my thoughts. It seems to me that the before is focused on violence. And if we click this before, then we'll get to that.
And I know I used to be like you. I used to fantasize about beating up men who beat up women.
Right, it's this part here. The before is focused on violence, both against the partner and the abuser, whereas the after is a focus on the underlying causes, which you are avoiding due to fear and not sweeping them away. So to anybody who says that this is for, you know, the average person, this would be the average person appeal. That in one, we're focused on the violence itself, and in the other, we're kind of focused on the causes that lead to violence. And he wants to shift your focus not just from, like, you know, mischaracterizing people or simplifying them or essentializing them because they're violent with people, and instead to look at the root causes of that violence, to be a little bit more empathetic there, right? He encourages us to empathize with abusers, to understand why they do what they do. He didn't feel empathized with, right? Mrgirl's issue with therapy and couples therapy stems from their unwillingness to help when he was in an ongoing abusive relationship. And I even word it very carefully in here, and I'm trying to word it very carefully with you guys. I've only heard him have issues with therapy and couples therapy. If, again, I'm open to the other links, but that is my impression from what little I've seen of him. While I agree that most people don't have as much control as they think they do, especially when snapping, the idea that it takes two to tango is a dangerous one, right? As I kind of hopefully exemplified here. While we cannot assign all the fault to one person, we need to really be careful about overcorrecting our empathy simply because we used to be an abuser or understand an abuser. I don't think presuming the other person feeds into it and should be expected to be culpable is a solid assumption all the time. And beyond that, I'll put an addendum to this and say it could be a dangerous one. It's helpful for a therapist to consider when evaluating how to, like, help with this situation or giving advice in this situation, right? Because I'm sure there's things that one side of the equation could change to help avoid these situations. But I think it's equivocating the two in an uncomfortable way, and I think we need to be careful about that, and he needs to be careful about that. Now, in terms of optics, focusing on the reasons someone harms their partner can easily be construed as saying harming a partner is reasonable, right? And he puts in those messages to kind of counteract that, but a lot of people are going to miss that, right? It's not reasonable despite understanding their reasons, right? It's an unreasonable and inadvisable response to issues. And I think he makes that clear at the end about jail and stuff like that. And he did also when he said that it doesn't mean that it's a good reason, doesn't mean it makes it okay, but it's something that I think people are going to get confused about and struggle with. So optically, it's a bit of a problem. The reasons or issues themselves can be valid, whilst your response of beating your partner is not. And if this is emphasized a little bit more, I think it could have helped people to stomach it. You know, ContraPoints would probably do a much better job of this, right? Because of her style. While I get the point of what the woman told him about the abuse being hot or sexy, the underlying message about not feeling bad about it because it's hot or sexy, which is the point of what she told him, is disgusting to me. I am much more apt to jump on board his idea that there are issues beneath the surface of rage that must be understood and addressed, but the idea that the abuse itself is sexy and passionate and that's why you shouldn't feel bad is not great. When he goes on and contrasts this with the dehumanizing characterization, I agree that's not an empathetic approach, but this way overcorrects in a toxic direction. Even if it felt good to him to hear someone who didn't turn him into a monster for having this problem. I get the point of including it is that one person finally humanized him and finally told him that he's not a monster for doing what he did. However, people can get lost, and this is why this is in optics. People can get lost on that being the point, or just straight up not care that that's the point, because what other abuser people that are listening might hear or might take away from it is different than what he is communicating. And without a ton of emphasis on this to correct for that misinterpretation, you're leaving it up to chance that people aren't going to interpret this in a negative way against you. And I don't know if including this story is super helpful. It could have been included in a different way that makes it more clear that, you know, she says that, but that sex and stuff doesn't make it okay. It certainly made it hard to stop doing, as he says, you know, later. But the way that he communicates it just does not it doesn't do good at dispelling concerns about that. I want to help Mrgirl help abusers. I do. I want to help Mrgirl humanize abusers. I do, which is why the advice in here is written the way that it is. It's not that I'm looking through a bunch of different lenses so much as I'm really trying to help this person communicate and do what they're looking to do. That's what I hope to apply to the other conversations that we look at in this drama team, Booksmarts intelligence agency sponsored arc, right, where we're looking at all of the Mrgirl and Brittany stuff. So I want to help these people achieve their goals. Oh my God, stepbrother, your margin is so big.